All right, this is Ubaid on behalf of V Electronics, and in this video, we'll be talking about macroeconomic externality. Okay, now we all know macroeconomics has to do with something on a broader scale, on a larger scale, okay, such as the entire nation, okay, a country, a continent, okay, so on and so forth. Now, micro on the other side has to do with something on a smaller scale. All right, so when we talk about macroeconomics and macroeconomic externality, okay, we know externality has to do with something that a third party suffers from or has to experience because of, let's say, two people. So we're talking about a third factor over here. So macroeconomics has to do with a third factor on a broader scale, on a larger scale, on a national scale. So macroeconomic, okay, macroeconomic externality. And basically, this theory, if you want to call it a theory, basically says that whatever happens on a broader scale, on a larger scale, is different than what happens on a smaller scale. Okay, so whatever happens. Okay, so say for example, if we were to take your supply and demand curve, let's assume that this is okay, your aggregate supply over here. This is your long range supply curve or full potential, full employment. And let's assume that this is okay, your aggregate demand curves over here. Okay, now at this point you have your equilibrium. Okay, your aggregate demand meets full employment. Okay, which means your aggregate demand is fine. Okay, nothing's wrong with your aggregate demand. However, because of an economic factor, and we talked about economic factors in the last video, because of some economic factor, what's going to end up happening is this aggregate demand curve, this AD curve, may shift to the left. So suppose this is AD0 and all of a sudden it becomes AD1 and your new equilibrium. Let's assume this is your new equilibrium over here for AD1. And if you look at your new equilibrium, okay, this is at the same price level, for example. Okay, so let's say the price is the same, but the real GDP is reduced. Okay, so either the quantity or the price of the goods and services on a national scale is the same, but the GDP goes down. All right. So if you look at the demand curve again, okay, we know that the demand curve shifts to the left, and this has to do with a recession, okay, or we can say a contraction of economic activity. And we can say that because we know that the real GDP is being reduced. And because this real GDP is being reduced, we can also say that unemployment has gone up to some extent because obviously, whenever there is recession, whenever the gross domestic product of a country goes down, the country suffers from unemployment to some extent because the firms are not making the profit they used to make, or there aren't enough firms on a national scale, okay, compared to before. All right, so as a result of which you have unemployment. And because this unemployment, okay, we also know, okay, that this is a contraction of the economy. All right. Now, this would be on a macroeconomic scale, okay, on a national scale. Okay, something on a microeconomic scale would be a firm that reduces price to increase the demand. Okay, so say for example, you have this firm over here, you have price and you have consumer demand. So let's say this is demand over here. And we know that as the price goes down, the demand goes up. So for some reason, let's say the firm experiences low demand, the firm will go ahead and reduce its price over here. Okay, so you see that the one firm is able to reduce its price level to bump its demand up. Okay, so this is microeconomics, and we can call this microeconomic externality. All right, and this one over here, this is your macroeconomic externality. So this is macro, something on a national, broader, or larger scale. All right, so this is macroeconomics and macroeconomic externality. Now, this situation over here, this particular situation where the price level does not change, has to do with price stickiness, which is a similar concept to your wage stickiness. Okay, so you might have contracts with the supplier, just like you might have labor union contracts for wage stickiness, which basically prevents you from changing the prices or changing the wages in the case of a labor union contract. Okay, so what ends up happening is even though the firm reduces output, okay, because obviously if the firm is experiencing a recession in general, okay, if the firm is not able to produce, if the demand goes down, the firm will go ahead and reduce its output, reduce its production, okay, and because the firm reduces production, and the price level or the price or the wages, for example, stays the same, okay, it has to do with stickiness. Okay, basically means that the wage or price is sticky. It doesn't change, even though the output, the unemployment, and the real GDP may change. But here, the price level is sticky because the real GDP changes, okay, the unemployment changes, but the price level stays the same. Okay, for a given demand. The demand goes down, but the price level stays the same. So price level stays the same. And this has to do with your macroeconomic externality. Okay, so that has to do with this video. On behalf of V Electronics, this is Obey. Have yourself a great day.